On the 6th of December, 1941, in the freezing waters of Hitokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands, Lieutenant Zenji Abe stood on the icy deck of the aircraft carrier Akagi and watched his own breath turn to clouds in the Arctic wind. Tucked inside the pocket of his leather flying jacket, pressed against his chest, were two things, a farewell letter to his wife, and a lock of his own hair meant for his funeral. He had written those final words that very morning. "If I do not return," he told her, "know that I served with honor." Yet at the back of his thoughts a quiet, unspeakable question kept circling. The Americans they were preparing to strike, were they really the weakened, decadent nation their commanders kept promising them? In the months to come, that question would be answered in the most devastating way imaginable. What the Japanese aviators came to understand after Pearl Harbor could not be counted in sunken ships or wrecked aircraft. It was something far more chilling. They had not crippled a fading power. They had awoken an industrial giant, one that would bury them under an avalanche of steel, aircraft, and warships produced at a speed that defied belief. This is the story of Pearl Harbor told from the Japanese side, not a tale of military glory, but of a nation's slow and horrifying discovery that it had picked a fight with an enemy whose factories were not merely stronger, but beyond comprehension. The road to Pearl Harbor was paved with desperation rather than confidence. In July of 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt froze every Japanese asset in the United States and slapped a complete embargo on oil. Britain and the Dutch East Indies did exactly the same within days. In one single move, Japan was cut off from roughly 80% of its petroleum. The empire's oil reserves, stockpiled patiently over many years, might stretch for around 18 months, and if war broke out, that cushion shrank to less than a year. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, grasped something that many of his fellow officers simply would not accept. He had studied at Harvard between 1919 and 1921 and later served as a naval attaché in Washington. He had walked American streets and toured American factories, he had seen American abundance with his own eyes. In January of 1941 he wrote a letter warning of what war with America would truly cost. Taking the Philippines, or even Hawaii and San Francisco, would never be enough. To make victory certain, he wrote, Japan would have to march all the way into Washington and dictate the terms of peace inside the White House itself. But Yamamoto was a patriot, and once his nation had chosen war, he would be the one to plan the blow. His strategy was brutal in its simplicity: hit the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor with overwhelming force, sink the battleships, and wipe out the aircraft on the ground. That would buy perhaps 6 months, maybe a year, for Japan to seize the oil of the Dutch East Indies and the rubber of Malaya, the raw materials it needed to survive, and then negotiate a peace from a position of strength before American industry could fully awaken. It was a gambler's plan from a man with a gambler's heart, and like most gamblers, he would lose. The first air fleet sailed from Hitokapu Bay on the 26th of November, 1941. 6 aircraft carriers led the way: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, screened by 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 9 destroyers, supported by 7 fuel tankers and 3 submarines. Aboard the carriers waited 414 aircraft, flown by the finest naval aviators on Earth. For the entire 3,500-mile voyage across the North Pacific they held absolute radio silence. The northern route, through seas torn apart by winter storms, was chosen precisely because almost no one ever traveled it. American reconnaissance planes would not be combing those frozen waters. The fleet reached its launch point 230 miles north of Oahu at 6 in the morning on December the 7th, 1941. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda, leading the first wave of 183 aircraft, lifted off from Akagi's flight deck just as dawn spread across the Pacific. For months the pilots had rehearsed over Kagoshima Bay, chosen because its geography mirrored Pearl Harbor, a shallow harbor that demanded precise approaches at extremely low altitude. The torpedo crews had practiced dropping their weapons from just 10 to 20 meters above the water, and their torpedoes had been specially modified to run at a depth of about 10 meters, rather than diving to the deeper levels that would have buried them in the harbor floor. One pilot had sent his pregnant wife home to her family in Nagano back in September, when the training grew intense. In keeping with Japanese custom, neither of them showed any emotion as they said goodbye, though she wrote to him every single day until his ship sailed. At 7:40 in the morning, Hawaii time, Fukuda's formations caught sight of the installations of Pearl Harbor spread out below. The anchorage was packed with ships, 8 battleships moored together along Battleship Row, the fleet sitting in port exactly as intelligence had foreseen. But something was wrong, something crucial. The 3 American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were nowhere to be seen. They were out at sea, their positions unknown. Fukuda made his decision in seconds: the attack would go ahead. He slid back the canopy of his Nakajima B5N2 and fired a single dark blue flare, the signal his pilots had trained for months to recognize. Then he sent out 3 words that would echo through history: Tora, 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 the code for tiger, tiger, tiger. Complete surprise had been achieved. The attack ran for 1 hour and 15 minutes across 2 waves. 2,403 Americans were killed and another 1,178 wounded. 2 battleships, the Arizona and the Oklahoma, were total losses that would never sail again. The Nevada and the Tennessee were badly damaged but would eventually be salvaged and repaired. 188 aircraft were destroyed on the ground. The Japanese, in turn, lost 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, and 64 men. By any conventional military yardstick, it was an extraordinary victory. And yet, as the Japanese pilots circled above the burning harbor preparing to head back to their carriers, some of them noticed details that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The enormous oil storage tanks along the shore, holding millions of gallons of fuel, sat completely untouched. The submarine base was intact. The repair shops were undamaged. The dry docks were still working. And those 3 carriers were still out there somewhere in the Pacific, untouched, and lethal. Lieutenant Zenji Abe flew in the second wave at the controls of an Aichi D-3A dive bomber. By the time his formation reached Pearl Harbor, the Arizona was already a blazing wreck. Her forward magazines had been detonated by a bomb from the first wave, killing 1,177 men in a single catastrophic blast. Abe went after the ship still able to fight, adding his own bombs to the destruction already raging below. The question that had gnawed at him on the frozen deck of the Akagi found no answer in the smoke and flame beneath him. It produced only more questions. There were calls to turn back and finish the job, to return and destroy the fuel tanks and the repair facilities. Admiral Nagumo refused. The First Air Fleet had accomplished its mission, the element of surprise was gone, American forces were now fully awake. The carriers had to withdraw before the American carriers could find them. The decision was tactically reasonable and strategically catastrophic. The ships Japan had damaged would be raised again, the aircraft would be replaced, but that choice to leave the infrastructure standing allowed Pearl Harbor to remain operational as the forward base for the entire Pacific Fleet for the rest of the war. As the Japanese fleet steamed back toward home waters, the pilots began to make sense of what they had seen. Yes, they had sunk battleships. Yes, they had achieved surprise. But the American base they had attacked had revealed something deeply unsettling. The sheer scale of Pearl Harbor's facilities, the number of ships present, the infrastructure visible even from attack altitude, all of it pointed to an industrial capacity far beyond anything Japanese intelligence had described. If this was only one American base, how many more were out there? That question would be answered with brutal mathematical precision over the following months. In 1941, Japan built 5,088 aircraft. The United States built 19,433, nearly 4 times as many. In 1942, while Japan struggled to replace the 4 carriers it had lost at Midway in June, the United States commissioned the USS Essex, the first of a class that would eventually number 24 ships. Japan had entered the war with 10 carriers. After Midway it would never again operate more than 6 at the same time. And the figures only grew more devastating with each passing year. By 1943, American factories were turning out somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 aircraft every single month, more in a month than Japan managed in a year. The Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary was assembled in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. Her keel was laid 1 minute past midnight on the 8th of November, 1942, and she was launched on the 12th. That was a publicity stunt, and normal production averaged 42 to 50 days, but by 1943 American shipyards were finishing 3 Liberty ships every 2 days. In the first 4 months of 1943 alone, American yards launched more merchant tonnage than Japan had built in 7 years of war. The gap in aircraft was just as crushing. In 1944 alone, the United States produced 96,000 aircraft. The Willow Run plant in Michigan, run by the Ford Motor Company, rolled out B-24 Liberator bombers at a rate of 1 every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. Each of those bombers held 1,550,000 parts, and American workers assembled them faster than Japanese factories could build fighters to shoot them down. Japanese crews now faced something their training had never prepared them for: American forces operating with what seemed like unlimited resources. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Japanese aircraft sent up against them, many flown by hastily trained replacement pilots, after the catastrophic losses at Midway and the battles that followed, were slaughtered in what American aviators grimly named the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan lost somewhere between 350 and 600 aircraft, along with 2 more carriers. The American industrial machine was now running at a pace that made Japanese resistance mathematically impossible. The pilots who lived long enough to witness this transformation suffered a psychological collapse as total as any defeat on the battlefield. Japanese airmen flew home in deepening despair after Midway. "Where are all these aircraft coming from?" they asked. "We shoot them down, and the sky just fills with replacements. This is industrial annihilation." By 1945, Japan's position was hopeless. The oil captured in the Dutch East Indies could no longer reach Japanese refineries, because American submarines, built at a rate Japanese shipyards could never match, had effectively cut the supply lines. Oil tankers lay on the ocean floor by the hundreds. Japan's navy, once the 3rd largest in the world, was reduced to defending its own harbors. The elite pilots who had trained at Kagoshima Bay, the men who had achieved complete surprise at Pearl Harbor, were mostly dead now, replaced by boys with months of instruction instead of years. Some were sent out on one-way kamikaze missions, the final admission that conventional naval aviation could no longer compete. By the time the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, they were almost beside the point. The Navy was gone, the Air Force had been reduced to suicide attacks. The empire that had struck at Pearl Harbor, convinced that 6 months of victories would force a negotiated peace, had instead set off the full mobilization of an industrial power that produced at rates beyond Japanese understanding. Over the course of the war, America built roughly 300,000 aircraft, 193,000 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million army trucks. Japan's entire war production, across every category combined, amounted to less than 10% of American output, and in many cases less than 5%. Yamamoto himself did not live to see the full scale of the disaster. On the 18th of April, 1943, American fighters, guided by intercepted and decoded messages from the JN-25 naval code that revealed his inspection itinerary, ambushed his transport aircraft over Bougainville. He had known the truth from the very start. He had walked American streets, seen the factories, understood the capacity. His final gamble had been that spirit and skill might somehow overcome industrial supremacy. He was wrong. The Japanese pilots who survived the war, Lieutenant Zenji Abe among them, would spend decades trying to process what they had witnessed. The attack on Pearl Harbor had been a brilliant piece of tactics, but it had revealed that America possessed industrial power beyond anything they had ever imagined possible. The oil embargo that had pushed Japan toward war was meant to stop Japanese expansion. Instead, it ignited a conflict that exposed the true hierarchy of global industrial might. Japan, which had modernized in a mere 50 years to become a regional power, had challenged a nation with 17 times its gross national income, 5 times its steel production, and twice its population. Once American production was fully mobilized, the outcome was never in doubt. American industry accomplished exactly what Yamamoto had feared most, not through superior strategy or tactical brilliance, though both played their part, but through sheer, overwhelming, relentless output. American factories built ships faster than they could be sunk. American plants produced aircraft faster than they could be shot down. American shipyards, aircraft works, tank factories, and supply chains operated on a scale that made Japanese resistance more futile with every passing month. By the time Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on the 15th of August, 1945, the nation that had struck at Pearl Harbor in 1941 had been comprehensively defeated, not by American fighting spirit alone, but by American industrial capacity operating at shares of global output that Japan could never hope to match. The pilots who attacked Pearl Harbor had awakened a giant, and that giant had buried them in steel.